They slapped me with a $500 fine for a chicken coop, said it clashed with the neighborhood aesthetic. Funny thing is, that little coop, it's the beating heart of a growing farm-to-table business they never saw coming. What they did next nearly shut me down, but they messed with the wrong farmer. It all began with a plain white envelope, tucked into my mailbox like it was nothing. Inside, a notice stamped in red: violation, unauthorized agricultural structure. At first, I laughed. I thought it was a mistake. I mean, I live in a semi-rural neighborhood. People have gardens, tool sheds, even goats. But apparently, my modest chicken coop had crossed some invisible line. They called it a nuisance, said it didn't fit the look they wanted. But what they didn't know is that those chickens fuel a fully licensed farm-to-table business, supplying fresh, organic produce to 3 restaurants and a local co-op. It's not just my passion, it's my livelihood. And the HOA? They weren't just trying to shut me up. They were trying to shut me down. The president, Karen, made it personal. First the fine, then the threats, and finally something so calculated, so cruel, it chilled me to the bone. At first, I thought it was paranoia. One morning, I was sipping coffee on my porch, watching the hens scratch near the rosemary bushes, when I heard a faint buzzing overhead. I looked up. A drone, small, black, and hovering right above my backyard. It floated there like it was watching me. And then, it darted away like it had seen enough. The next day, I found another violation notice taped to my front door. Failure to comply. Livestock still present. Livestock. They used that word like I had cows roaming the yard. It was 6 hens. 6. No roosters. No noise. Just eggs in a coop that was hand-built, clean, and tucked away behind a privacy fence. But the HOA had clearly made me their target, and Karen, the president, had declared war. From then on, the notices didn't stop. They started small, $50 here, $75 there. But when I didn't back down, they escalated. Daily fines, threats of legal action, demands to relocate my hens within 10 days, or face further disciplinary consequences. I had to laugh at that one, like I was a kid being sent to the principal's office. But the laugh didn't last, because next came the so-called random inspections. That's when I started seeing HOA board members strolling past my house, phones out, snapping photos through the slats in my fence. Once I caught one standing on a ladder behind their car, trying to get a clear angle into my garden beds. They claimed they were documenting unauthorized structures, but what they were really doing was spying. They even took pictures of my compost bins, said they weren't aesthetically compliant. Can you imagine that? A compost bin not matching the neighborhood visual standards? And through all this, Karen stood in her front yard under a 12-foot inflatable flamingo that swayed in the wind like some deranged lawn god. Right next to it, a rusted tool shed with peeling paint and no visible permit. The hypocrisy was like a punch in the gut. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I showed up at the next HOA meeting, folder in hand, ready to speak. I didn't yell. I didn't rant. I simply asked why the rules were being selectively enforced. Karen didn't even flinch. She crossed her arms, leaned back in her chair, and said, "We don't enforce rules on ourselves. Only on violators." The room went silent. The kind of silence that vibrates, the kind where everyone hears the lie but no one's willing to admit they're a part of it. It was then I realized this wasn't about chickens. It was about control, about dominance, about a petty power structure run by people who got high off telling others what to do. They weren't trying to maintain the neighborhood. They were trying to break me, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. You see, while they were busy stalking my garden, I was building a paper trail. Every letter, every notice, every dollar they fined me. I had it all cataloged. Dates, photos, even footage of the drone flying over my yard, which, by the way, is a privacy violation under state law. But I didn't stop there. I started digging. I pulled HOA meeting records. I requested public zoning documents. I spoke with neighbors who had been silently bullied into removing porch furniture, repainting their homes, or hiding kids' bikes because they'd been labeled clutter. One couple had to remove a swing set because Karen said it was unsafe, even though her own grandkids played on it during family visits. Another man had been fined for parking his truck too close to the curb, while Karen's SUV routinely blocked part of the sidewalk. A pattern was emerging, a very ugly one. What I found was a web of manipulation. Karen had been running the HOA like her personal fiefdom. Rules for thee, not for me. And most of the board? Either hand-picked friends or too scared to oppose her. But I wasn't scared. I was furious. And I was about to make her regret ever targeting my chickens. Because while she was flying drones and issuing citations, I was contacting attorneys. I was talking to agricultural lawyers, city zoning officials, and even a local reporter who had been investigating HOA abuse in nearby neighborhoods. Turns out my business, because it's licensed as a farm-to-table agricultural operation, is protected under urban agriculture codes, which means the HOA has zero jurisdiction over it. But I didn't show my hand, not yet. I waited, I let her stack the fines, let her keep building her paper wall of threats. All the while I was reinforcing mine, quietly, carefully, relentlessly, because sometimes the best way to fight back is to let them think they've won. Let them grow bold, let them hang themselves with their own rope. And Karen? She was already standing on the stool, tightening the knot. What she didn't know was that her little war over a chicken coop was about to blow up in her face, and I was going to be the one to light the match. Here's the thing about battles. The side making the most noise is usually the one losing. While Karen and her crew were out there with their drones, their fines, and their smug grins, I kept quiet. I let them believe I was cornered. Let them believe their little HOA kingdom was untouchable. But behind the scenes, I was building an empire of my own. You see, my little chicken coop isn't some hobby. My entire operation is structured under an agricultural LLC, fully registered, taxed, insured. I'd done everything by the book, which means state protections apply. Urban agriculture laws are clear. If you're a licensed business operating within city guidelines, especially one providing local food supply, you are not subject to residential aesthetic codes. My chickens, my crops, my compost bins, they were all protected. Karen didn't know that, of course. She just saw feathers and assumed weakness. But that was just one side of the board. The other? I'd been playing long-game real estate. Every month I watched the HOA newsletters. I watched the housing market in our neighborhood. Every foreclosure, every struggling property, those listings were signals. I started buying, quietly, through an arm of my business designed for property acquisition. Not to flip them, not yet, just to own. A duplex here, a small fixer-upper there, a unit that used to be an Airbnb but sat empty for months. I made deals fast. Cash offers, quiet closings. And last Thursday, I signed for my 7th property. At first, it felt like just another notch on the ledger, until I looked at the numbers and realized something stunning. I now own 63% of the neighborhood's properties, more than half, the majority. And with that comes something powerful. Voting control over the HOA board, the very institution that tried to bury me, was now under my thumb. But I didn't go running in with paperwork, waving deeds in the air. I waited for their next move. I knew they'd hold another board meeting soon. They always did at the end of the month. And they always left the public comments section at the very end, like a courtesy, like they were doing us a favor. This time I showed up early, sat front row, with my lawyer. Karen walked in like she was about to oversee a royal court. Clipboard in hand, power walk in full effect, pearls clacking against her collarbone. She gave me a tight-lipped smile, the kind you save for people you've already decided are beneath you. She had no idea the floor beneath her was about to crack wide open. They went through the usual motions, finances, landscaping complaints, repainting requests. Then Karen cleared her throat and said, "Now regarding continued violations at Lot 17, that was me." She actually had the audacity to prepare another motion to increase the fines. I stood up. My lawyer slid a folder across the table. Inside, property deeds, business registration, legal precedent on urban agriculture laws, documentation of drone flights, witness statements, and a notarized letter formally challenging the authority of the HOA to enforce residential codes on an agricultural entity. Karen blinked. Once, twice. Her lips parted like she was about to speak, but nothing came out. I let her sit in that silence for a moment. Then I said calmly, "I'd like to call for a board revote. As a majority property owner, I believe that's well within my right." The room went dead still. You could feel the oxygen leaving. One of the board members, a guy named Paul who always looked like he hated being there, glanced over at my paperwork. He knew what it meant. He actually whispered, "Oh my God." "Karen?" She wasn't whispering. She was staring at me like the walls were closing in. Because in that moment, she realized the truth. She hadn't just been fighting a neighbor with a chicken coop. She'd been fighting a businesswoman with a war chest. And now the power she clung to, the rules she twisted to crush others, it was slipping through her fingers. The board had no choice. My lawyer made sure of that. Within 15 minutes, the revote was scheduled. Karen's leadership was officially challenged, and her precious fines temporarily suspended pending investigation. The icing on the cake? As we stood to leave, my lawyer turned to Karen and said, "Oh, and the drone footage? That's a privacy violation. You'll be hearing from us separately." She didn't say a word, just sat there, clenching that clipboard like it could save her from drowning. And me? I walked out of that meeting with my head held high, knowing the game had officially changed. They tried to crush me over a chicken coop, but they forgot one thing. I don't play by their rules. I write my own. The next HOA meeting wasn't like the others. Word had spread. Quiet conversations between driveways. Whispers exchanged at mailboxes. The neighborhood was waking up, and this time, they were watching. Karen strutted in like she still held the crown. Clipboard in hand, lips pursed, pretending the last meeting hadn't happened. Pretending she hadn't been legally challenged, outmaneuvered, and, worst of all, surpassed. But the power in her walk was cracked, like porcelain pretending not to be broken. And when I stood up and handed her the official petition for a revote of leadership, her hand actually trembled. It had 17 signatures, enough to trigger a mandatory review. Every homeowner I rented to, a few neighbors she'd bullied, even Paul, the board member who finally grew a spine. The petition wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a reckoning. I read my statement aloud, clear, controlled. Every word hit like a gavel. Karen has used her position not to protect this community, but to control it. She's harassed homeowners, selectively enforced rules, and repeatedly violated the HOA charter for personal gain. I formally request her resignation effective immediately. Gasps. A couple murmurs of agreement. Even one slow, brave clap. Karen's face drained. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could spin some manufactured defense, my lawyer passed a thick folder across the table to the rest of the board. Inside, photographic evidence, drone footage timestamps, testimonies from neighbors, copies of every violation she filed against me, all of which were null under urban agriculture protection laws. Then came the moment that turned the entire meeting into something unforgettable. The city zoning rep walked in. I'd invited him personally, scheduled and confirmed. He walked straight to the board's table, shook hands, then calmly and clearly confirmed what I already knew. My business and every structure on my property was 100% legal, protected, and outside the HOA's enforcement scope. Silence. You could feel it, like a slow thunder rolling under the floorboards. Karen's last card had just been shredded in front of everyone. She tried to challenge him. Of course she did. Said the law was ambiguous, that the HOA had the right to maintain visual harmony. But the zoning officer didn't flinch. He pulled out the actual ordinance and read it aloud. Verbatim. Protected. Licensed. Untouchable. Karen was done. Still, she clung to the delusion. Said, "Well, we'll see how the board votes." And then, Paul stood up. Shaky at first, but stronger with each word. "I vote for her resignation." One by one, they followed. Even her closest ally, a woman named Linda who once fined a teenager for hanging string lights, bowed her head and voted yes. And just like that, it was over. Karen didn't cry, didn't yell. She just stood slowly, like she had aged 20 years in 10 minutes. She placed her clipboard on the table. Her lips moved as if to say something defiant, but no words came. She left the room in silence. No applause, no jeers, just the sound of justice settling into place. As for the fines, wiped, completely. The board issued an apology in writing. They even offered reimbursement for legal expenses, which I declined. I didn't want their money, I wanted the message to be clear. This isn't about revenge, it's about respect. And the new HOA board? Well, they're surprisingly reasonable. We don't always agree, but they listen. And yes, they now get a dozen fresh eggs delivered every Sunday. That's not a bribe, it's a reminder. A reminder of where power really comes from. Not titles, not drones, not manufactured violations, but from the quiet persistence of people who build things with their hands, who know the value of land, community, and standing up when it matters. They tried to bury me over a chicken coop. Instead, they grew a movement they couldn't control. And I walked out of that meeting not just with my dignity intact, but with the entire neighborhood looking at me differently. Not as a troublemaker, not as some farmer with a legal technicality, but as the woman who stood her ground and turned the rules against the ruler. I thought the storm had passed. Karen was gone. The board had been reshaped. My fines were history. The hens clucked in peace, and my business thrived under the quiet sun again. But peace, it seems, was just the eye of the hurricane. The very next morning, a new envelope arrived, this one from Karen's personal attorney. Inside, a cease and desist letter accusing me of emotional distress, public defamation, and, my favorite, intentional disruption of community order. Apparently, losing her iron grip wasn't something Karen took lightly. But here's the thing about people like her. They think intimidation is a strategy. What they don't realize is I've stood knee-deep in mud during storms worse than this. I don't scare easy, and I don't back down. If she wants a legal fight, I'll give her one. And this time, it'll be public. What would you do if your HOA came for your livelihood? Drop your war stories in the comments below. Like and subscribe, because Karen's not done yet, and neither am I. The courtroom's next, and she's about to regret everything.